Get out of my life. Electra slaps Ivy after Daphne's shocking truth bomb. The pressure in the Forrester manse had been erecting like a storm about to break, and Electra Forrester's feelings had reached a boiling point she could no longer contain. Ivy Forrester, standing there with her usual trim, manipulative grin, had allowed. She had orchestrated the perfect plan, subtly nudging events so that her solicitations and schemes would remain retired. But the Verity had an impregnable instigation of its own, and Daphne had just delivered the kind of disclosure that would shatter anyone's precisely constructed visions. Electra's eyes, wide and glistering with unshed gashes, locked onto Ivy as if trying to burn down every taradiddle, every treason, every manipulation that had been precisely calculated by the aged Forrester. Her hand quivered slightly as it rose, also swung with the unforeseen, shocking force that connected with Ivy's impertinence, the poke echoing through the quiet room like a projectile, resonating against the walls that had witnessed so numerous family secrets, backstabbings, and dolor over the times. Get out of my life. Electra's voice cracked with a admixture of anguish, fury, and unbelief, carrying every ounce of treason she felt, and for a moment time sounded to indurate in the Forrester living room. The world outdoors, the fashion shows, the business deals, the casual grins and polite discussion, all sounded inapplicable, transcended by the raw, visceral verity of a son defying the family who had toyed with her heart, her trust, and the veritably fabric of her family. Daphne, standing off to the side, still shaking from the emotional bouleversement of revealing what she had uncovered, watched the scene unfold with a admixture of fear, guilt, and relief, fear for the damage this battle could do, guilt for knowing the Verity sooner and yet having dithered, and relief that at last, the manipulations and falsehoods had been brought into the harsh light of reality. Ivy, her hand artificially touching her crimsoned impertinence, staggered slightly from the unanticipated force, her composed surface cracking for just a bit of an alternate as she registered the depth of Electra's wrathfulness and hurt. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, to deny, to twist the narrative in her favor as she so frequently did, but Electra's light was unyielding, a burning testament to the pain she had endured, the nights of confusion, the rumored falsehoods, the precisely drafted manipulations designed to push her and will piecemeal, to keep her from seeing the Verity, and Ivy realized, maybe too late, that her control over the situation had slipped fully, that the web of dishonesty she had so precisely spun was unraveling in front of her veritably eyes. The room sounded to constrict, the air thick with the pressure of implied allegations and heartache, as Will, standing hard, could only watch in stupefied silence, torn between shock, wrathfulness, and sympathy, knowing that his own passions had been caught in the crossfire of Ivy's schemes, that his trust had been tested, and that the foundation of his connections with both Electra and Ivy would no way be the same again. Electra's casket heaved as she plotted to catch her breath. Every word she had held back for months now pouring out in an alluvion of emotion, a admixture of unbelief, rage, and anguish. I ain't believe I ever trusted you. I can't believe you'd go this far, betray everyone like this, manipulate my life, my love, everything. Her voice wavered, breaking as the weight of the treason settled completely on her shoulders. A crushing consummation that the family she had formerly respected, the one she had commended in, the one she had allowed into the most intimate corners of her life, hadn't only deceived her but had laboriously worked to undermine her happiness at every turn. Ivy's expression, formerly so confident and tone-assured, flitted with commodity nearly suggesting fear, though it was snappily masked by a protective posture, a half-hearted attempt to twist the narrative back onto Electra, to explain, to reason, to gaslight. But Electra would have none of it. The times of manipulation, the subtle backstabbings, the rumored falsehoods that had erected up over time had reached a critical mass, and in that moment Electra's wrathfulness was absolute, pure, undressed. I'm done with you, she wrangled, each word sharp, deliberate, cutting through the thick silence like a cutter, and Ivy staggered back, realizing that whatever influence she had applied over Electra, whatever control she had allowed, she was gone, shattered irreparably by the Verity Daphne had revealed, the Verity that Electra now carried like a armament, a guard, and a arsonist each at formerly. The storm of feelings in the room was nearly palpable, charged with times of family pressure, battles, and particular backstabbings, each memory and slight surfacing as if summoned by Electra's righteous fury. The letters manipulated, the rumored secrets, the colluding alliances, each now pointless in the face of raw, unornamented Verity. Daphne, pulsing, eventually stepped near to Electra, her voice soft yet firm. a stabilizing presence in the chaos. Electra, you demanded to know. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't. Electra, slightly hearing her, was lost in the curve of wrathfulness and anguish, her aspect locked on Ivy, whose face had now shifted from shock to despair, a transitory vulnerability that many had ever witnessed, a crack in the facade that had long defended her from responsibility. Ivy opened her mouth, but no sound came, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she realized that her schemes, her manipulations, her careful conniving, had been exposed in the most dramatic, inarguable way possible. And in that living room, with its soft lighting and precious furnishings that had borne substantiation to decades of Forrester drama, a line was drawn in the beach, a line that Electra, with an admixture of pain, strength and defiance, had just etched indelibly. Ivy Forrester, manipulator, fabricator and family in name only, was no longer welcome in her life, her family or her heart, and the impacts of this battle would ripple through the Forrester heritage, through Will, through the very business they all had worked to make, as the Verity, and Electra's righteous wrathfulness reigned supreme, a cathartic and ruinous turning point in a family saga that had been defined by love, treason, and the unyielding power of secrets eventually brought into the enduring light. The room remained heavy with silence, the echoes of the poke moping longer than any words could, and Electra, her hand still slightly raised from the impact, took a deep, jouncing breath, knowing that this moment marked not just a battle, but a reckoning, a emancipation, and a profound reshaping of her life, her identity, and her connections. As Ivy, eventually silent, eventually seeing the consequences of her choices, stood in stupefied, helpless consummation that the game was over, and she had lost irrevocably and fully, to a family who had set up her courage in the wake of verity, pain, and an unvarying determination no way to be manipulated again. Indeed, after the sonorous poke, the air in the Forrester manse sounded nearly suffocating, heavy with the residue of raw emotion. Ivy stood frozen, her fritters brushing the red mark on her impertinence as if touching it might ever abolish the demotion and the verity that had been laid bare. She opened her mouth, trying to articulate the clever apologies she had rehearsed innumerous times in front of glasses, but no words came. The verity, so inarguable and sharp, had lodged itself in the room and in everyone's minds like a chip that refused to budge. Electra, her eyes still glistering with gashes and fire, took a small step forward, her fists gripped at her sides. Every whimwamps in her body screamed, every treason she had endured clawing its way to the face. The room was silent except for the faint crack of the forefather timepiece in the hallway, each alternate amplifying the pressure, the kind of pressure that could erupt into farther battle or collapse into despair. Daphne, still pulsing, took another conservative step closer to Electra, doubtful whether to intermediate or let her friend process her rage. Electra, she started, but Electra's sharp regard silenced her. The youngish Forrester's aspect was nearly unsupportable, a blend of anguish and implacable fury that could indurate anyone in their tracks. No, Daphne. You don't get to explain it now. You don't get to fix this. She's destroyed everything. Electra's voice trilled, a fragile edge of vulnerability concentrated beneath the stormy wrathfulness. Her casket rose and fell fleetly as she plotted to maintain control, but her voice carried, piercing the room and Ivy's defenses likewise. Will, standing a many bases down, had been caught in a web of shock, wrathfulness, and helplessness. He'd always known Ivy could be manipulative, had suspected her motives from the morning, but nothing had prepared him for the full extent of her dishonesty. Seeing Electra unleash her wrath, seeing her pain overload so physically, stirred a deep defensive instinct in him. Electra, perhaps, he started, only to be cut off by her sharp, nearly pained regard. Electra's light was filled with a ferocity that made it clear this battle was hers alone. Will's heart sank a little, the weight of helplessness pressing on him as Ivy stood, now visibly pulsing, her precisely constructed mask slipping. Ivy's voice eventually surfaced, quiet and protective, yet with the hint of despair creeping in. Electra, stay. I can explain. You don't understand. But Electra was formerly shaking her head, her hands now pulsing slightly from adrenaline and wrathfulness. Explain? Explain. You've been manipulating my life, Ivy. You've prevaricated to me, to Will, to everyone who ever trusted you. You've played with our hearts like they were toys, and now I see everything for what it is. Her words, each syllable sharp as a blade, carried the weight of months of treason, the careful unraveling of trust, and the sting of domestic dishonesty. Daphne, her hands gripped nervously in front of her, eventually set up her voice again, softer this time, reluctant but sincere. Electra, I know it hurts and I know it feels insolvable, but I told you the verity because I watch. I couldn't let Ivy continue to manipulate everything. Electra's breathing was ragged, yet her eyes softened slightly at Daphne's words, though her wrathfulness had embedded. She glanced compactly at Daphne, her expression a mixture of gratefulness and despair. I know you were trying to do the right thing, Daphne, but the damage it's formerly done. Ivy, seeing the drift of the battle slipping from her control, tried to pivot, to appeal to Electra's feelings. Electra, you have to believe me. I didn't mean for any of this to be the way it did. I allowed. I was guarding you in my own way. Her voice, high-pitched now, quivered, betraying her fear. She had always reckoned on charm, cunning, and subtle manipulations to control situations, but the raw, undressed wrathfulness in Electra's eyes now rendered her tactics useless. Electra's lips pressed into a thin line as she shook her head sluggishly, her casket heaving. Guarding me? By lying? By pushing Will and me piecemeal? By twisting my life into your games? That's not protection, Ivy. That's atrocity. Pure advised atrocity. The words sounded to hang in the air, each one a hammer strike to the fragile veneer Ivy had cleaved to. The room sounded to shrink around them, every polished face, every elegant piece of cabinet work, every Forrester memorial echoing the family's history of triumphs and backstabbings. The pressure was nearly palpable, a living thing that wound itself tighter around everyone in the room. Will, who had been silent, eventually stepped forward cautiously. Ivy, this isn't just between you and Electra. Your choices, they affect everyone. You have to face what you've done. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of authority, a plea for acknowledgement, for responsibility. Ivy's eyes flitted between Will and Electra, and for the first time genuine fear crossed her face. The confidence she had worn like armor was gone, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, and cornered. I didn't suppose, she started, but Electra cut her off again, sharper than a head. You didn't suppose? You no way suppose about anyone but yourself, Ivy. You do'n't see the damage, the hurt, the destruction you leave in your wake. Daphne moved slightly near to Electra, placing a conditional hand on her shoulder. Electra, take a breath. Do'n't let her hurt you more. You've been strong through so important formerly. Electra's eyes softened compactly at the touch, her body pulsing from the whirlwind of feelings, yet she didn't yield. Her voice, though quieter now, carried an icy resoluteness. No. This ends now. Ivy, you're done with me. Done with my life. Done with my trust. You need to leave. Right now. Ivy's face went pale, the graveness of Electra's words sinking in. She opened her mouth, searching for a reply, but nothing came. Electra's aspect bore into her, grim, unwavering. There was no mercy, no concession, no room for denial. The times of falsehoods, whispers, and manipulations had all crowned in this moment, and Electra had drawn her line. Will, observing the battle, felt a stitch of anguish. He'd loved Ivy formerly, had believed in her eventuality for change, had hoped for redemption, but now he'd to face reality. Ivy, it's over. Not just with Electra but with all of us. You need to accept it. His words were calm, nearly detached, but beneath the face lay a deep current of heartache and disappointment. Ivy eventually lowered her head, gashes welling in her eyes, her lips jiggling as she rumored, I didn't mean to, I allowed. I was helping. But Electra, her resoluteness unwavering, stepped closer, her voice a blend of authority and pain. Helping? You call this helping? You've poisoned every relationship you've touched, Ivy. Every trust. Every fellowship. And now you're nothing but a foreigner in my life. Get out. The room fell silent except for the soft, shaky breaths of the three women and Will. Ivy, realizing the full extent of her insulation, sluggishly turned, her shoulders drooped, her face etched with a admixture of shame, remorse, and fear. She left the room without another word, each step heavy, resonating like a burial march through the hallways of the manse she had formerly called home. Electra sank onto the nearest lounge, her hands covering her face as the storm of feelings eventually crashed down on her. Daphne knelt beside her, offering silent support, while Will remained standing, his heart paining as he watched the fate of Ivy's departure. The Verity had surfaced, raw and undressed, and the Forrester family's delicate web of connections had been irreparably altered. The manse, generally filled with horse laugh, business chatter, and the hum of ambition, was now a place of quiet reflection, of reckoning, and of emotional injuries laid bare. Electra eventually looked up, her eyes red but clear, a sense of grim determination settling over her. She had survived the treason, brazened the manipulator, and reclaimed a sense of agency over her life. But she knew the trip ahead would be fraught with pressure, undetermined passions, and the need to rebuild what had been broken. As she peered at Daphne and Will, she rumored nearly to herself, "I wa'n't let her ruin us, not presently. This is my life, and I choose who's in it." The room remained quiet for a moment longer, each person lost in their studies, the weight of Ivy's treason still moping in the air. But for Electra, a new chapter had begun, one defined by courage, clarity, and an imperturbable resoluteness to no way allow dishonesty to mandate her life again. Outdoors, the megacity of Los Angeles carried on, unconscious to the particular storms raging within the walls of the Forrester manse. Yet within those walls, a son had stood up to a family had brazened its secrets, and the echoes of a single indelible poke would reverberate through the Forrester heritage for times to come. Electra remained seated on the lounge, her body still pulsing from the emotional hurricane that had just erupted. Yet beneath the shock and hurt, a spark of clarity had begun to burn. She could still feel the sting of Ivy's falsehoods, the weight of months of manipulation pressing down like a vice, but for the first time, she allowed herself to admit the relief of having eventually brazened it. Daphne sat beside her, offering silent comfort, her presence a steady anchor in an ocean of emotional turbulence. "You were so strong, Electra," Daphne rumored gently, her voice soft yet filled with sincerity. "You faced her, you told her exactly what you feel. That takes further courage than utmost people ever have." Electra's lips quivered as she half smiled, the gesture further of prostration than joy. "I do'n't feel strong," she admitted still. "I feel broken. And angry. Angry that someone I trusted so fully could betray me in ways I didn't indeed know were possible." Will, still standing near the doorway, watched Electra with an admixture of anguish and admiration. He'd been caught off guard by the sheer intensity of the battle, by the ferocity of Electra's feelings, but he also understood her need for space and clarity. "Electra, I want you to know I'm then for you," he said precisely, his tone measured yet warm. "Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'm not going anywhere." Electra's aspect darted toward him, her eyes still red and fluffy from the gashes she hadn't allowed herself to exfoliate before. For a moment the wrathfulness softened, replaced by a fragile stopgap. "Will I do'n't indeed know how to trust again," she admitted, her voice slightly above a tail. "Not Ivy, not anyone." Her words traced off, swallowed by the weight of everything she had been holding in. Daphne reached over, placing a reassuring hand on Electra's arm. "Trust takes time," she said gently. "It's okay to feel spooked, to feel uncertain. But you're not alone. We're then, and we'll help you rebuild." Electra jounced sluggishly, taking a deep, jouncing breath. The pressure in her body began to rot slightly, though the emotional injuries remained raw and tender. I can't believe she did all of this," Electra muttered, shaking her head. "All the falsehoods, the schemes I allowed. We were sisters. I allowed. We had each other's tails." Her voice cracked on the last word, the treason echoing in the quiet room. Will took a step closer, his hand reaching out tentatively. "Electra, she wasn't acting like a family. Not to you, not to anyone who signified. But that doesn't mean you're helpless. You've brazened her. You've taken the first step in reclaiming your life." Electra's eyes met his, searching for verity, for consolation, for some sense of stability amidst the chaos. "I know," she said eventually, her voice steadier now. "But it's not just about her. It's about everything she's affected, my Gemütlichkeit, my family, indeed Will." Her aspect softened as she looked at him, a admixture of pain and gratefulness reflecting in her eyes. "I feel like my whole world has been listed, and I'm not sure how to make it right again." Daphne squeezed her arm gently, her voice unwavering. "You do'n't have to do it all at formerly. One step at a time. And the first step was standing up to Ivy. That was huge. Electra closed her eyes compactly, letting the words settle. She could feel the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep prostration that sounded to